I sat beside Ethan's hospital bed, my fingers gently smoothing the edge of the blanket tucked around him. The room was dim, just the soft glow of a small lamp, casting pale light across his face. He looked different like this, softer, vulnerable. I wasn't used to seeing him that way. Ethan was the kind of man who lifted weights heavier than my self-esteem, and still had enough breath left to laugh at his own jokes. He had only come out of surgery an hour ago. The doctors said he'd be drifting in and out for a while, so I just stayed close, watching the rise and fall of his chest, letting the beeping machines fill the silence. I told myself I was only here because we were friends, best friends for 5 years. Nothing more. Nothing complicated, at least. That's what I thought. I reached to adjust the blanket again, tucking it under his arm, when suddenly his fingers clamped around my wrist. Hard, warm, desperate. Ethan. I froze, staring at his half-closed eyes. His lashes fluttered, his brow tightening as if he were fighting something behind his eyelids. His grip didn't loosen. If anything, it tightened. His thumb brushed weakly against my skin, like he was afraid I might slip away. His lips parted, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with sleep and emotional heaviness I'd never heard from him before. "Marcus, don't go." My breath caught. Ethan didn't talk like this when he was awake, ever had. "I'm right here," I whispered, leaning closer, but he didn't seem to hear. His fingers curled fully around my hand now, holding it with such raw need it made something in my chest twist painfully. "Don't leave me. Not again. Again." The word shot through me like a spark. My pulse stumbled, confusion swirling inside me. We'd never had a moment like this before. Never something even close to it. Ethan had always been the grounded one, steady and self-contained. What did he mean again? And why did his voice sound so broken? I swallowed, staring at him, at the faint tremble in his jaw, at the remnants of fear etched into his otherwise calm features. Maybe it was just the anesthesia. Maybe he didn't know what he was saying, or maybe he did. I didn't know which possibility scared me more. I squeezed his hand gently, unsure if he could feel it. Unsure of anything, really. All I knew was that when his breathing steadied and his hold finally relaxed, my own heartbeat didn't. I didn't know it then, but that moment changed everything. I've never been good at letting people in. Maybe it comes from growing up in a house where conversations were either loud fights or silent stares, where affection felt like something you had to earn by being useful, invisible, or both. By the time I was old enough to live on my own, I'd learned to rely on myself. Trusting people wasn't just difficult, it felt dangerous. At 25, my world was small. Classes during the day, a part-time tech support job in the evenings, a tiny apartment cluttered with cables, textbooks, and half-finished projects. Most people my age had friend circles and weekend plans. I had noise-canceling headphones, and the satisfaction of fixing problems I didn't have to talk about. Then Ethan walked into my life, literally because I'd dropped my phone outside the grocery store, and he almost stepped on it. He apologized, even though it wasn't his fault. Then he picked it up, handed it to me with this warm, easy smile, and said, "Careful, man. These things don't bounce." I didn't know it then, but that was the start of everything. Ethan was 34, 9 years older, but with the kind of energy that made him feel both younger and wiser. A gym trainer, but not the loud show-off kind. He was strong, sure, but more in a gentle giant way. The kind of guy who looked like he could break a wall, but would stop to move a snail off the sidewalk. His family lived in another city, though lived was generous. They barely called, rarely visited. He didn't talk about them unless he had to, and even then, it was always vague. There was a loneliness inside him he tried to hide with jokes, but sometimes, late at night, I saw it. Our friendship grew slowly, almost accidentally. At first, it was casual conversations when we bumped into each other at the store or at the small cafe near my university. Then, he found out I loved video games and insisted we play together just once. Once turned into every Friday night. He'd show up at my place with a bag of chips. I'd complain about my assignments, and he'd say, "Okay, Marcus, tell me what's stressing you out this week." Like he genuinely wanted to know. Like he cared. No one in my life had ever asked that before. He became one of the few people I trusted, maybe the only one. He was there through every stressful exam week, dropping off coffee or sending me voice notes telling me to stop overthinking. He dragged me out for late-night drives whenever he sensed I was drowning in my own mind. Sometimes he'd take the long route just so I could talk more, though half the time I never did. He didn't push. He never did. And yet, I always felt something warm settle in my chest when I was around him. Admiration. Comfort. Safety. Words I didn't recognize because they didn't belong in the world I grew up in. But, whatever that feeling was, I kept it buried. Deep. Then came his accident. He'd been helping a client train for a competition, spotting their lift, when something went wrong. A sudden shift. A weight jerked down. Ethan reacted fast enough to keep the client safe, but not himself. Torn shoulder ligaments. Surgery needed. Weeks of recovery ahead. When I first visited him after the injury, he shrugged it off, saying, "Guess I'll finally take a break." But I saw the shadow behind his smile. Ethan wasn't someone who sat still. He wasn't someone who liked being taken care of, either. He lived alone in a small but cozy apartment filled with plants he somehow kept alive despite forgetting to water them. The thought of him struggling with everyday things, showering, cooking, even getting out of bed, twisted something in me. So I offered to help. I didn't think twice. And he didn't hesitate to say yes. But there was something else. Something softer in his eyes when he agreed. Something like relief. Or fear. Or both. I didn't understand it then. I also didn't understand why. Around that time, Ethan had started avoiding certain topics, particularly anything to do with relationships. Once, during one of our game nights, he mentioned an ex-boyfriend in passing. He said it casually, but his voice had wavered. Just a little. After that, whenever I asked about his past, he'd brush it off. It was a long time ago, Marcus. Doesn't matter now. But the way he said it told me it did. Still, I never pushed. I never asked why his smile sometimes seemed too practiced, too polished, or why he always hesitated before saying goodnight. Like he wanted to say something more but couldn't. Back then, I didn't know the reason. I didn't know how much he had already lost, or how much I was about to find. When the nurses finally discharged Ethan, he moved slower than I'd ever seen him. Even walking from the wheelchair to my car looked like it took effort he didn't want me to notice. His right arm was wrapped and stabilized, his posture slightly hunched from trying not to pull anything. Ethan always stood tall, broad shoulders, proud chest, steady presence. Seeing him like this, it did something strange to me. Something tight and protective. "I'll be fine," he said for the third time. Struggling to buckle his seatbelt with one hand, I leaned across him to help, and he froze. Not because of the pain, because I was too close. I could feel the breath he held. I ignored it, snapping the buckle into place. "That's exactly what people say before doing something stupid," I muttered. He chuckled softly, but his eyes stayed down. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not?" I said. The firmness in my voice surprised even me. "I'm staying with you for a week. No arguments." He opened his mouth, probably to argue anyway. But then he saw something in my expression: worry, determination, maybe something I wasn't ready to name, and he just nodded. "All right, Marcus." His quiet acceptance made my chest feel too full. His apartment felt different with him injured. The space that always carried his warmth now felt dimmer, slower. I guided him to the bed, helping him sit. Ethan's jaw clenched each time the pain flared, but he kept insisting, "I'm okay." Like saying it enough times might make it true. The doctor had given strict instructions. No pressure on the shoulder, no sudden movements, and absolutely no showering alone for the next couple of days. Ethan tried to downplay it. I can manage. I'll just keep the water low. Ethan, I cut in. You literally can't lift your arm. I'm helping. Silence stretched. His face softened with something like embarrassment. Or maybe trust. Turn around, I said gently. The first night set the tone for everything that would follow. Helping him shower was awkward, but not for the reasons either of us expected. I stood behind him, making sure the water didn't hit his bandages, guiding his movements when he tried to wash with his good hand. He kept apologizing every 2 minutes. Marcus, you don't, I do. You shouldn't, I should. At one point, he leaned slightly against me for balance. Just a second, just enough that I felt the heat of him. The strength that was still there beneath the vulnerability. It stirred something inside, me warm, heavy, confusing. I shoved it down immediately. He needed help. That's all this was. When it was time to dry off, I stayed focused on his hair, his shoulders, his back. Never lower, never longer than necessary. Still, his breath hitched once, barely audible. I pretended I didn't hear. He pretended he didn't make the sound. Later, in the kitchen, I cooked a simple dinner while Ethan sat at the counter. He looked exhausted but relaxed, his good hand wrapped around a mug of tea. You cook now? He teased lightly. I've always cooked, I said. You microwave things. That doesn't count. I rolled my eyes, but when I glanced at him, he wasn't laughing. He was watching me softly, like the sight of me doing something as ordinary as stirring a pan meant something to him. It made my stomach twist. I looked away quickly, focusing on the sizzling pan, but the weight of his gaze stayed on me, warm and steady in a way no one had ever looked at me. Maybe too steady, maybe too much. When I finally brought him dinner and helped him get settled on the couch, he relaxed into the cushions, eyes heavy with exhaustion. We watched a movie, though I barely followed the plot. I kept glancing at him, making sure he wasn't in pain. When he shifted suddenly, a sharp breath escaped him. His hand flew to his shoulder, face tightening. Ethan, I leaned in immediately. He tried to wave me off, but the pain was too sharp. Instinct overruled everything. I reached for him, my hand covering his, steadying him. His eyes snapped to mine. We froze like that, my hand over his pain easing just from the touch. The room quiet, except for the low hum of the TV. We were too close, too exposed, too aware. Neither of us moved. His fingers unconsciously curled, not gripping, acknowledging the contact, accepting it, letting it happen. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. I didn't pull away. He didn't either. The moment stretched just long enough to mean something neither of us dared to name. Helping. Ethan with his physical therapy exercises became part of our daily routine morning and evening, slow and careful. The doctor had given us a list of movements he needed to practice. Small ones that looked easy on paper, but clearly hurt him more than he ever admitted. Okay, I said, standing behind him as he sat on the edge of the bed. Raise your arm until it's level with your shoulder. He tried. His breath hitched halfway. Easy, I murmured, sliding my hand under his elbow to support the weight just enough. He leaned into the touch without meaning to. I felt the heat of his skin, the tremble in his bicep as he tried to hold the position, the soft grunt he made when he couldn't push further. Good, I said gently. That's enough for today. When I lowered his arm for him, his fingers brushed mine. They stayed there, longer than an accident would justify. Not gripping, not withdrawing, just lingering. His eyes flickered up to mine for one split second before he pulled away abruptly. Cheeks tinted. Sorry, he muttered. Reflex. Right, except it didn't feel like reflex. It felt like he didn't want me to let go. And the worst part was, I didn't want to let go either. I swallowed the thought, pushing it deep where I stored everything I didn't want to face. But the memory from the hospital wouldn't leave me. It replayed over and over like a glitch in my mind. His hand gripping mine, his voice breaking. Don't leave me. Not again. Don't leave me. And then that one line I hadn't mentioned to anyone, not even to myself properly. I thought I lost you. Ethan wasn't conscious enough to know what he was saying, but the emotion in his voice, raw, desperate, wasn't something that came from anesthesia. It came from fear. Real fear. Fear of losing me. But why? And what did again mean? I pushed the questions aside, but they rattled around inside me every time I looked at him. One night, around 1 a.m., I woke up thirsty. I walked to the kitchen, passing Ethan's room on the way. Usually he slept deeply, but tonight the lamp beside his bed was still on, casting soft golden light across the hallway floor. I hesitated, then knocked lightly on the doorframe. You awake? Ethan looked up from his bed. He wasn't lying comfortably, his pillows had shifted, and his expression showed he was trying not to make a sound while adjusting them with one functioning arm. Yeah, he said with a small, embarrassed laugh. The pillows won. Move, I said, already stepping in. He rolled his eyes, but scooted up a little. I reached behind him to readjust the pillows, fluffing them, shifting the angles so they supported his back and arm properly. He let out a quiet sigh of relief. There, I said. Better? But as I was pulling back, his hands suddenly shot out and wrapped around my wrist. Instantly, my breath caught. Not because I was startled, but because this time, he wasn't half-conscious. He was fully awake, and he grabbed me like he needed to. His fingers tightened not painfully, but deeply, with purpose. He pulled my hand closer to him, holding it against his chest. Marcus, he whispered. I froze. Everything inside me went silent. His eyes met mine, dark, soft, afraid. Wanting. There was something in them I'd never seen before. Something he'd been hiding for years, maybe. Something I wasn't sure he wanted me to see. My knees weakened, and I sat on the edge of the bed automatically. Our faces were closer than they'd ever been outside that hospital moment. Ethan. My voice was barely there. What's wrong? He shook his head slightly, jaw tight. Nothing's wrong, he said in a low voice. I didn't want you to go. The honesty in his words cracked something open in my chest. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't deflecting. For the first time since the surgery, he let me see the truth tightening his throat. He wasn't scared of the pain. He was scared of me leaving. His thumb brushed my wrist gently, slowly, like he was memorizing the shape of me. I couldn't move. I didn't want to. The tension between us thickened, heavy and electric. A moment suspended between breaths. But then Ethan's expression changed, fear flickering behind his eyes. Fear of what he was doing. Fear of crossing a line. Fear of losing something important. He dropped my hand suddenly, like it burned him. I'm sorry, he said quickly, sitting back. I shouldn't have forget I did that. His voice was rushed, shaky. Ethan, no. He didn't look at me. I don't want to ruin things. Please, just go to sleep. And just like that, the moment slipped through his fingers and mine. But his touch stayed. His fear stayed. His wanting stayed. And so did the truth I finally started to see. Ethan wasn't pulling away. He was terrified of how much he didn't want to. The next morning felt different. Not in any obvious way. Ethan still moved slowly. Still winced when he reached too far. Still asked me what I wanted for breakfast, even though he couldn't cook. But something in the air between us had shifted. A thin layer of silence, stretched tight and fragile. He didn't look at me. Not really. He answered my questions with short replies, kept his head down, kept his good hand busy with anything he could reach: his phone, the TV remote, the edge of a blanket. Anything that wasn't me. It shouldn't have bothered me. We were friends. Friends could have weird moments. Friends could accidentally cross boundaries and retreat a bit. But the sting burned anyway. Every time he looked away too quickly. Every time he stepped back before I could help him. Every time he spoke like he was choosing his words too carefully. I felt it. I felt all of it. And I didn't understand any of it. It got worse in small ways. He avoided brushing past me. He didn't ask for help unless he absolutely had to. He wouldn't sit too close on the couch. And when I caught his eyes lingering on me once, just once, he turned away so fast you'd think I was aflame and he was scared of being burned. The distance wasn't loud. It was quiet. Quiet enough to make me doubt myself. Had I done something wrong? Did he regret holding my hand? Did he regret needing me? The questions dug under my skin until I couldn't ignore them. One afternoon, while I was folding laundry in the hallway, Ethan's voice drifted from his room. Low, shaky, not like himself. I realized he was on the phone. Yeah. He sighed softly. I don't know. I messed up. A pause. His sister's voice was too faint to hear, but I could guess the tone, concerned and annoyed in that protective sibling way. No, he didn't do anything. It's me. I'm the one. His voice cracked a little. I'm the one who needs to get it together. My hand froze on the towel I was folding. Another pause. Then Ethan whispered barely, but I heard it. I don't want to push him away. My heart slammed into my rib cage. Him. Me. I stepped back before I could listen further, guilt and confusion tangling in my chest. I shouldn't have overheard, but those words, they kept ringing through me. I don't want to push him away. Push me away from what? From helping him? From being friends? Or from something more? The thought sat heavy in my stomach. Was I imagining it? Was I reading too much into a moment? Into the way his hand had held mine for too long? Into the softness in his eyes that night? What did I feel? Care, of course. Admiration. Always. Comfort. Safety. Yes, all of that. But deeper. Something sharper. Something I had buried without realizing. I didn't know. And not knowing scared me more than knowing ever could. The tension finally snapped that evening. I was helping him sit up on the couch, adjusting the cushions behind him. He flinched, not from pain, but from me, and something inside me cracked. Ethan, I said, sharper than intended. What's going on? He stiffened. Nothing. Don't lie. I'm not lying. Yes, you are. The words burst out before I could stop them. You won't look at me. You keep pulling away. You barely talk. Did I do something? Did I cross a line somehow? His jaw tightened. Marcus, because I feel like you're shutting me out, I continued, voice trembling with frustration I didn't know I had, and I don't even know why. 1 minute, you're grabbing my hand like you need me. And the next minute, you act like touching me is. That's exactly the problem. His voice thundered through the room. I stopped breathing. Ethan's chest was heaving. His eyes burned with something raw: fear, anger, longing, all tangled together. The problem, he said quietly, painfully, is that when you touch me, I forget we're only friends. The room went silent, utterly, terrifyingly silent. I stared at him. He stared at me. I felt the words hit me one by one, slow, heavy, real. When you touch me, I forget we're only friends. My throat went dry. My heart stopped. My thoughts scattered in every direction at once. The word barely made it out. Ethan looked away sharply, his breath unsteady. Just forget I said anything. But I see OULDN. Single quotes too. His confession hung in the air. Dangerous, fragile, true. And I was left speechless. Caught between the fear of losing him and the truth I was finally starting to see inside myself. I didn't expect him to talk that night. We'd argued earlier, voices raised. Emotions ran. The apartment had settled into a tense, heavy silence. I stayed in the living room, pretending to scroll on my phone, while actually replaying his words on a loop. Because when you touch me, I forget we're only friends. It hit harder each time. Just when I thought he had fallen asleep, I heard the soft drag of his crutch and the careful shuffle of his steps. Ethan appeared in the doorway, backlit by his bedroom lamp, looking exhausted not from pain, but from fighting with himself. "Marcus," he said quietly, almost too gently. "Can we talk?" I nodded, unsure if my voice would even work. He sat on the couch beside me, hesitated, then shifted until he was close enough that our knees almost brushed. He stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking. "You deserve to know why I react the way I do." His voice shook. Ethan never let his voice shake. "I used to love someone," he began, swallowing hard. "Years ago. And I loved him too deeply. Too honestly. It scared him. He told me I was overwhelming." My chest tightened. Ethan gentle, careful, soft-spoken. Ethan overwhelming. I thought he felt the same, he continued. I thought we were building something real. But the moment things got serious, he pulled away. Little by little, until he wasn't there anymore. He exhaled, a shaky breath that sounded like a wound reopening. I learned something then, Marcus. Loving someone is easy, but trusting them not to leave, that's the part I can't seem to do anymore. His eyes lifted to mine, glassy but steady. "And you're the one person I can't afford to lose." His voice faltered. "You're the safest thing in my life, and that terrifies me." I felt something inside me shift, like a door I didn't know existed, had quietly unlocked. I'd spent so long focusing on helping him, keeping him steady, being his support, that I hadn't noticed how deeply he depended on me emotionally too. "I can survive pain, Marcus," he whispered, "but not losing you." The room went completely still. The words unthreaded something in my chest. My heartbeat echoed in my throat as memories came flooding back, moments I'd dismissed but now couldn't ignore. How he said my name differently than anyone else, soft, careful, as if it meant something to him. How he reached for my arm without thinking whenever he was tired or hurting. How his whole body relaxed when I entered a room. Like he didn't even know he was holding his breath until I showed up. And suddenly I realized how much I'd been missing. How I had grown used to waking up and hearing him, shifting in the next room. How I counted his breaths when he slept after the surgery, without even realizing I was doing it. How the apartment felt hollow whenever he wasn't near. I hadn't wanted to question it. I hadn't dared. But now, hearing him admit everything he had been afraid to say, my own denial cracked straight down the middle. "Ethan," I finally whispered, voice uneven. "I didn't know. I should have seen it." His eyes widened, fear flickering, their fear of saying too much, of losing the little he still felt safe holding on to. But for the first time, I didn't look away, because I finally understood. This wasn't just friendship, wasn't just care. It was something deeper, stronger, something neither of us had been ready to name, but something that had always been there, quietly growing between us. And now that I had finally seen it, I couldn't unsee it. The storm rolled in just after sunset. Dark clouds swallowed the sky, thunder shaking the windows like a warning. I checked on Ethan twice before midnight, pretending it was about his leg, pretending the tension between us hadn't been pulsing beneath every breath. Since our talk earlier, when the lightning struck close by, the apartment trembled and everything went black. The power snapped off with a sharp click, plunging us into darkness. "Ethan," I called. "I'm okay," he answered from his room, but his voice was thin, unsure, just surprised. I grabbed my phone for light and walked to him. He was sitting up in bed, shoulders tight, clearly trying not to show he was uneasy. Ethan hated storms. I already knew that, but tonight, with emotions still raw between us, everything felt magnified. "You cold?" I asked. He nodded, embarrassed, A little. I didn't think. Kai just acted. I found the softest blanket we owned, draped it around his shoulders, then sat beside him, so close our legs touched beneath the covers. The room was dim, lit only by the faint glow of my phone screen turned face down. The storm outside made the air thick and heavy, like the world was holding its breath. And so was I. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the kind that says more than words ever could. Finally, I spoke. "Ethan, can I ask you something? And I want the truth." His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Okay?" I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to go there, past fear, past confusion, past everything I had avoided for weeks. "That night," I said softly, "when you grabbed my hand in your sleep, what were you afraid of?" He stiffened. His fingers tightened in the blanket. The storm cracked again outside, but Ethan's silence felt louder when he finally answered. The words barely made it past his lips. "That you'd walk out of my life," he whispered, "like everyone else did." My heart clenched. He wasn't looking at me anymore. His eyes were focused on some point far away, somewhere inside a memory I wasn't part of. "I told myself," he continued, voice trembling, "that if I didn't say anything, if I didn't hope for anything, then I wouldn't lose you. I'd rather hurt quietly than risk you ever stepping away." I felt that like a punch straight to the chest. Without thinking, I reached for his hand, but this time I didn't let go. His finger twitched in surprise, but he didn't pull away. His palm was warm, his grip hesitant, but real. Slowly, he turned to look at me, eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Ethan," I said, my voice shaking, "you have to know. I'm not going anywhere." He searched my face as if trying to see whether I meant it, truly meant it. So I told him what had been building in my chest for days, maybe weeks. "When you got hurt," I said, "I realized something was wrong, not because you were in pain, but because I was terrified. Terrified of losing you. I kept telling myself it was just worry for a friend, but it wasn't. I know that now." The air thickened between us. "I feel something for you," I whispered. "Something real. Something I've tried to ignore, but I can't anymore." His breath hitched. "Marcus," he said, and it wasn't just my name. It was a plea. I didn't move closer. He did. Just a fraction. Just enough to erase doubt. His forehead touched mine, gently, like a question asked without words. "Don't leave," he murmured, voice cracking. "I won't," I whispered back, and then it happened. A soft brush of his lips against mine, uncertain, hesitant. I felt his breath tremble against my mouth. He was scared. So was I, but the warmth spreading through my chest pushed everything else away. I kissed him back. Slow, careful, real. His hand slid up to my cheek, tracing the line of my jaw, as if memorizing it. The blanket slipped from his shoulder, pooling around us like a cocoon when we finally broke apart. He stayed close, breathing against my skin, forehead still pressed to mine. "I'm still scared," he admitted. I squeezed his hand gently. "So am I." His lips curved into the smallest smile. "But you're here," he whispered, "and that's enough." The storm raged outside, but inside our little pocket of darkness, something finally settled, something finally made sense. Morning came slowly, like it was afraid to disturb what had happened the night before. I woke up before Ethan. He was still asleep beside me, breathing softly, the faintest crease between his brows slowly relaxing. For the first time since his surgery, he looked peaceful, safe. I watched him for a moment longer than I probably should have, memorizing the way his lashes brushed his cheeks, the way his fingers curled toward where my hand had been. I slipped out quietly, just to give us a moment to breathe. My heart was still thudding with the memory of his lips, his voice, the way he'd whispered, "Don't leave." I knew I wasn't the same person I had been yesterday. Something subtle had shifted, or maybe it had been shifting for weeks, months, and last night simply made it impossible to ignore. I made breakfast mostly to distract myself. Eggs, toast, tea. Simple, familiar. But my hands were shaking a little, and I caught myself smiling like an idiot at the pan. I heard the soft shuffle of footsteps behind me. Marcus. His voice was hoarse with sleep. I turned around, spatula still in hand. Morning. Ethan was leaning against the doorway, blanket wrapped around his shoulders like a cape. His hair was a mess, sticking up at odd angles. He looked happy, tired, but happy. And the look in his eyes, God, I had never seen it so open, so unguarded. Did you sleep okay? I asked. He nodded slowly. Better than I have in weeks. A pause. Then, softer, because you were there. That warmth in my chest threatened to overflow. I cleared my throat and turned back to the stove before I did something stupid, like walk over and kiss him right there. Breakfast is almost ready, I said. Sit, I'll bring it to you. He obeyed, though with that small smile he tried and failed to hide. He watched me the whole time, chin propped on his uninjured hand as though he couldn't take his eyes off me. When I set the plate in front of him, his fingers brushed mine. Not by accident. Definitely not by accident. Thank you, he murmured. We ate in a quiet, soft kind of silence. Not awkward, not tense. Just warm. Every now and then, he'd look at me, and every time, my stomach did something embarrassing. Halfway through his eggs, Ethan spoke. So, about last night. My heart did a somersault. I put my fork down. Yeah, I've been thinking about it too. He wiped his mouth with a napkin, then looked at me with a seriousness that made everything else fade. I don't want to rush you, he said, or scare you, or make you feel like you owe me anything just because I confessed. I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. Ethan, you didn't force anything. You didn't push anything. If anyone was blind, it was me. He shook his head gently. You were scared. So were you. He huffed a small laugh. Still am. Good, I said, because I am too. At least we match. He squeezed my hand, thumb grazing my knuckles in a way that made breath catch in my throat. What do we do now? He asked quietly. I thought about his recovery, my studies, his fear of ruining what we had, my fear of losing him. Take things slow, I said. No pressure. No rushing. Ethan nodded, relief softening his features. And when you're healed, I added, we're going on a date. His brows lifted. A real one. A real one, I confirmed. You can even choose the restaurant. He grinned. I like this plan. The next month passed. Gently, Ethan recovered steadily. I stayed with him the whole time, eventually packing more clothes, then my toiletries, then my books, until we both realized I had basically moved in. One evening, he looked at the pile of my stuff by the dresser and laughed softly. You know, he said, you could just make it official. I shrugged casually, hiding my smile. Maybe I already did. Living together felt natural, like our lives had been orbiting each other for years and finally joined the same path. We learned small domestic things about each other. Ethan talked in his sleep, sometimes usually nonsense. I liked to shower before coffee, or else I was unbearable. He hummed when he cooked. I read out loud to distract him during physical therapy. And slowly, without even noticing, our home formed around us, one afternoon. After weeks of rehab, Ethan stood in front of the mirror, shirtless except for the brace strapped across his chest, his shoulders still stiff, but stronger, braver, ready, I asked, as I'll ever be. I stood behind him, hands at his waist, grounding him. He inhaled deeply and raised his arm a full stretch, trembling but complete. He did it. You did it. I burst out, pulling him into a hug carefully, but passionately. He laughed, breathless with pride. I actually did. I loosened my hold, just enough to look at him, but before I could say anything, he wrapped both arms around my waist, stronger than I expected. See? Ethan murmured with a teasing smirk. My hands still don't want to let go. I felt my heart flip, warm and certain. I placed my palm over his, tightening the space between us. And this time, I whispered, neither do I.